We have Mr. Dermot Weld here tonight, which is a huge honour, Dermot. And like that now, I mean, obviously you're so closely tied to equine events and to veterinary. Was it a natural career progression for you?
Yeah, I suppose it was. My mother and father were very involved. My father was a racehorse trainer. I rode as an amateur, and it was a logical progression to be. My father never wanted me to train racehorses, very wisely. And the only deal I had with him was that if I became a vet, he'd let me train racehorses. And that's how it started.
So he kind of bribed you, basically?
More or less. And no, I don't regret it. I think it's been a huge help to my career. I think we're just talking about it at our table. Is the thing that's always interests me was the psychology and the mental aspect, because basically anybody can, in my opinion, train a racehorse. But I think it's the consistency and to appreciate the amount of stress that the individual horses undergo. And there's a whole lot more to it than maybe people think, just looking at a horse race and things like that and preparing and training for a horse. I've no doubt whatsoever my veterinary training was a huge help to me. And nowadays, I think in the early days it was a colossal help. And I think John Ox is here there, and John will agree with me. We had a huge advantage. But nowadays, with modern technology, you can buy the food in prepared rations. You can get everything on the internet. So I think our advantage is dramatically diminished. But it's been a wonderful asset to be a vet. I think it's a great honour, and it has served me well around the world. And I have many, many happy memories of all funny incidents and things that happened to me, because I more or less put myself through college, and I rode as an amateur. And I was very fortunate to be 3 times leading amateur of Ireland when I was graduating. I think I was 17, 19 and 21 I was leading amateur. But I possibly earned more money riding as an amateur than most professionals did in those days, because I would only ride. Edward O'Brien Lynch stayed with me, and we stayed in single apartments, digs, everything you can think of, all over Dublin. Mostly based in the Navan Road, because 3rd year we had to go out to Abbottstown, and getting out there wasn't easy. And I remember one time Frank Austin was the lecturer, main man in pharmacology, and pharmacology used to be the hardest subject to pass. And it was very inconvenient for me, because I very often wanted to ride on a Thursday, and the tutorials and things were Thursday afternoon. And I had to come up to all sorts of ways of escaping. But I remember once we had to go a bit early because I was riding a horse that would win in Killarney. And Edward came with me, and we escaped anyway. And we were going a bit late, so we were going through, I think it was Castle Island. And I was driving, got stopped for speeding. So the only way out of it was to tell the guard that we'd win and be sure he backed the horse. And fortunately I did win. But on the way back, you're relaxed, you're happy, and you want to get back as quick as you can, back to Dublin again. And naturally, you can guess that I was caught for speeding going back again. And unfortunately, the sergeant did not back the horse, and did not approve. And to tell you the times we're in, the car just about made it. In fact, the thermostat went when we got close to the Navan Road, and we walked home the last bit to our digs. But they were the days, if you know what I mean, and it was a wonderful time, and thoroughly, really, really proud that I became a vet. I think it's something we should all be very proud of.
I can't imagine that's the only time. I can't imagine that's the only time you pulled that one with the here guard, back that one there, and I'll sort you out later on.
Yeah, well, yeah, throughout life. And another occasion was I brought a horse to Vintage Crop, the first of my Melbourne Cup winners. And I suppose being a vet, it gives you confidence. You don't realise it, you don't talk about it. But at the back of it, it does give you great confidence to know that you've graduated after 5 years of very, very hard work. And indirectly, it does give you that little bit of confidence. And when I brought Vintage Crop in 1993 to win the Melbourne Cup, everybody said I was mad. It could never be. Everybody that was involved in the horse business, both in the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere.
It had never been done, though, had it?
No, it had never been done before.
There you go.
And I got the idea when I qualified first, I went and worked in Australia. And that's where I always you know, you're having a drink at night time and you're trying to say European horses are better than Southern Hemisphere horses, and naturally the Aussies all claimed that theirs was the greatest race and Europe's weren't any good, and so it goes. So I always wanted to bring a horse back. Quickly and briefly, had this horse, and decided it was time to have a crack at it. And quickly, to tell you a little story, eventually it was decided the horse was to go. It had never been done before. No horse had ever gone to race in Australia, in the Southern Hemisphere. And I spent about a year working on it because we had to change the flight path of the planes, and we had to change all the quarantine regulations in Australia. But anyway, that's another story. But on the day the horse was to leave Ireland, he was on there was a flight went once a week from Heathrow to Melbourne. It was a Cathay Pacific cargo flight, and we had to connect that. Quarantine is 2 weeks in Ireland, 2 weeks in Australia. It had to be done. Connecting plane from Dublin to Heathrow. Everything was arranged, 6 o'clock in the evening for the flight. But one thing, with all the meticulous planning I did, I forgot about fog. And the plane coming to pick up the horse was coming from Heathrow, and there was fog over Dublin. And the pilot, very kindly, he got as far as Liverpool speak, and then he came up, flew over Dublin. The fog was pretty bad. He circled around twice. He had 2 attempts to land, and he couldn't. And he said he'd give it one more try, and if he got in, great, and if not. And I remember walking across the path from my house to where the stables where the horse was. I was actually relieved, because this whole thing is mad. And it'll save so much money, so much everything. I won't be perceived to be stupid. And, you know, it'll go away and all the pressure will be gone, and I'm just dead lucky if he doesn't get in. I really had gone that far. Lo and behold, I got a call to say the pilot had got a hole in the fog into Dublin. The rest is history. The horse went down. From a gambling point of view, he was 28 to 1 because nobody thought he would win. He was 40 and 80 to 1 in Australia. Then he was 40 to 1. 2 quick stories. It was early 90s, you must remember, and right across the world, the economies were pretty poor. And recession was everywhere. And we were just coming out of recessions. And 2 little incidents about gambling. One guy in Australia, husband and wife, they came up to me immediately after the race. They were unbelievable. They had mortgaged their house, they'd run out of money, the house was gone, and the last few dollars they had, they backed vintage crop at 80 to 1 to win the Melbourne Cup. And actually, I get a letter every Christmas still from them. And naturally, I'm invited to stay in their house and live with them or whatever I want to do if I ever go to Melbourne. And the other was the true story of the story you can imagine of the guy that went to Australia, and a young guy was meant to be doing great and sending the word home, how well he was doing, making money, wonderful weather, great, everything. And in fact, he was doing pretty poor. He wasn't doing well. He didn't have a job. And he hadn't been home for 5 years. He wanted desperately to come home. He wanted to leave Australia, didn't have the money. And again, he either borrowed the money or got it, and he backed him at 40 to 1. And my biggest job was literally to pull him off me, because the guy was just in such a state that this horse, winning this race, had done so much for him. So there are 2 little stories.
Did you ever think, Dermot, and we actually will get a microphone to John Ox as well, did you ever think when you first started out, after you finished riding, you first started training, that you would get to, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 and more winners?
No, of course you don't. It's like, I suppose, in any sport, you hope you'll achieve certain things, and indeed, John has been wonderful what he's achieved. And we've both been very fortunate, and we're both realists how difficult the business that we're in and how tough and how hard it is. But I've been very fortunate. I've had a great staff all the way up. I've worked very hard. And as I said, my veterinary profession has been a huge help to me.
You said to me before we sat down for dinner as well that you're still enjoying it as much as you ever did.
Oh yeah, I think it's a great challenge, and I love a challenge. And again, I think it goes back to this, the confidence that one gets with your veterinary degree, the hard work that you've put in to be a vet. It stands you in great stead, and it definitely gives you the encouragement to go forward. I can't put it into words, but it just gives you that go-to to know you can succeed if you work hard enough. And I work very hard because I was busy riding horses, as you heard, missing tutorials, so I had to work pretty hard. I had to keep myself very fit. I used to put on sweater. At the height I am, I had to run quite a bit to keep my weight down. And when I was finishing study, which I worked, Edward and I, we used to work pretty hard. We'd study, stop studying, and then I'd go for a run, come back, have a bath, probably go out dancing 4 or 5 nights a week. So
we'll do a bit of that later on.
You kind of work, you work hard to be a vet, and you get that work ethos, and you carry it through your life, I think.
Yeah, it's a work ethic. I think sport is a bit like that as well. You know, you talked about discipline and patience. John, it strikes me that, you know, you kind of have to have that mix, and that Dermot had it in spades.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a grind, you know. I think veterinary is a hard career. You know, I know lots of vets. I never practiced as a vet, but I know lots of vets, and it's a tough life, tough physical life. Ours is a bit the same, you know. It's 7 days a week, and you know, you've got a daily routine, early mornings, you know, long day, but it's good for us, you know. I like it. I enjoy it still. Just the same, I think, as Dermot does. I like the daily routine, even though it's 7 days a week. It's you know, you wake up in the morning because you know you're waiting for the alarm to go off. You know, you're up and out, and you know, you get frustrated at times. Things aren't going so well, and you think, God, you know, when am I going to win another race? You know. And but you get out in the morning, and you're out with the horses and with the staff, and you know, you get a lift when you see the morning's work unfold, and you're directing it and looking at the horses, watching, planning their next move. You know, you get wrapped up in the job, and if you didn't like it, you couldn't do it. But when you like it, you'll keep doing it, and you'll work 7 days a week because you like what you're doing, and you get a lift from it.
Can you tell us something, or can you put into words what Dermot Weld has done for the sport of horse racing in his time as a trainer, I suppose, more than anything else? Because that's why we're here, I suppose, is to acknowledge the achievements of all our veterinary greats.
Well, sure, Dermot's been, you know, as you say, I mean, you asked him, did he think he'd train 3,000 winners when he started? I can tell you he damn well did think he was going to. He said about it, you know, so it was no surprise to him. But no, well, Dermot, of course, will always be famous for the Melbourne Cups, and I think it's been a great achievement. He not only won it once, he won it twice. And he was very unfortunate not to win it 3 times with Vinnie Rowe, who was second to a wonder mare who won 3 in a row, and Vinnie Rowe gave her weight. So he's almost pulled it off 3 times, which I think is his greatest achievement, that he'll always be well remembered for. And he's been, you know, consistent, and he's, you know, what more can I say? You know, he's been Ireland's most successful, consistent trainer over many years.
Hear, hear. It deserves a round of applause, I think, doesn't it? Derek McGrath, the man to my right. I mean, you're here to talk about rugby, but as CEO, recently appointed, about a couple of years now, of the Curragh, you're no stranger to Mr. Well's achievements either.
No, I think I've benefited from being a veterinary surgeon, that Dermot gives me the time of day, because we've made his life a misery, and probably John's as well, actually, because they both train at the Curragh. So we've been doing 2 years of development, so it's been a nightmare. But for me, look, being involved in sport, like all of us here, everybody in the room, being up close and watching the masters of a sport to practice, and I have the privilege of literally standing watching these people train on a daily basis, magnificent athletes, but they're the guys who have to train. And I mean, John and Dermot, and again, back to what Brian said, you know, the way Irish sport and Irish sports people and the success that they show and demonstrate on an international stage. I mean, the example of what Dermot and John have done worldwide, they are probably more revered than they are even in their own countries. The respect with which they're both held for what they've achieved is immense. And you know, for me, it's been a joy watching it. While I've been making their life a misery, it's been good fun watching what they do and learning a lot more about what they do and why it's so special.
I'm sure they don't agree that you're making their lives a misery.
No, they do. They do.
How did you end up? I'd love to know, you know, because you're CEO of the Curragh now, was it your veterinary background that brought you in that direction, having come from, you know, European Rugby Cup, you know, arranging Heineken Cup and all of that, working in rugby and then going back to the Curragh job? Was it because you had the veterinary background that drew you that direction?
It was part of it, but it wasn't the driver. I suppose the driver was the attractiveness of the project. It was an iconic project, an amazing race course that had the track but just didn't have the facility to match. And what appealed to me was that it was a combination of interests, and it was very similar to the way European rugby was organised, in that you had, at European rugby, you had the clubs and the unions sitting around the table from 6 countries. And in this case, you had HRI, the governing body, you had the regulator, the turf club, and then you had all the private investors who had agreed to work together to produce this magnificent facility. And that was the first major appeal, because I thought, if you can get all those people around the table, you're going to succeed, because you've got the right people, the right energy, and the right vision to make it achieve. So that was really the driver. But the fact that it was in horse racing and the veterinary interest clearly was something that I suppose allowed me to feel much more comfortable very quickly.